Hello, test, test, test. Hey, Joni, how you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Okay, should I wait a few minutes and see if somebody else shows up, or do you want me just to start since it's
Can wait
4?
another minute since I noticed that Shauna had signed up
Okay,
to be here. But I think it's just the time of day, people
Yep.
trying to get to where they're getting to. So
Yeah, I can understand that.
it might just be you and me, but since you're recording it, I definitely would treat it just regularly and get a clean recording to share.
Okay, great. I can do that. All right, I think I can get started. All right, so today's webinar is going to be about why trading in the first place, and that trade is a win-win situation. So a little bit about me: I teach economics, Valor Christian High School. This is my 10th year there, and I really do love and enjoy the subject. So I'm going to screen share my PowerPoint. So we're going to get there. And here is the PowerPoint. So why trade in the first place? So this is an actual poll that it'd be running. Which statement best describes the idea of trade being win-win? And since the number of participants is kind of small, I'll walk through some of the answers for the poll. But there's a Poll Anywhere app or website that you could go on to participate in the poll, and then the responses would come up. So typically people kind of think of as trade or the economy as a fixed pie, which can sometimes lead to some bad policy prescriptions. And pretty much any economist that you ask will trade or will say the very last option there, that the pie is ever expanding, is the best idea of trade being win-win. There's a handout that I also sent beforehand that we won't get to quite yet, but we'll have expanded activities in case you wanted to read a book about this, or wanted to show other videos. I am going to show one video that describes kind of this idea best, and that is next. So this is called the $1,500 sandwich. So I'm going to let you watch and enjoy. All right. So you couldn't glean from the video, what he was trying to do was to make a sandwich from scratch. So he was growing his own material. He was going and getting salt from the ocean. Yeah, he was pickling things, making his own butter and that in his apartment. And so this entire operation, he had 15 steps, and actually he has a YouTube channel. Um, that you can see makes other things like a Thanksgiving dinner from scratch, and there's a couple of items that he does this for. And what he it ends up costing him about $1,500 to make this sandwich in 6 months of his life. And at the end, he's like, "That's not bad." And so, really, when we trade, this idea of voluntary exchange creating wealth, some of the wealth that it's creating is the fact that it gives us time to do other things. And so the activity that I'm gonna walk through and that the handout covers is an activity that teachers can do from, I would say, first grade all the way up. I teach juniors and seniors, and they still love this activity. So it's one of those very few classroom activities that teachers can do regardless of the grade that they teach. There aren't a lot of activities like that that I've found. So to give you kind of an idea, if you look at this chart right here, it's a situation I walk my students through the first day of class and tell them it's a bad graph because the axes aren't labeled. But the y-axis is per capita GDP, which is basically if you took what a country created in a year, sold it all, and divided up all that money, it's what each individual citizen would get when you divided that money up. And on the bottom are the years, and so this leaves off at about year 2000. But if you look at the graph, it's interesting in that the year zero, there's a little bit of wealth in the world with the Roman Empire, and then it basically disappears until you hit the Renaissance era, and then it kind of disappears again until you hit the Age of Enlightenment and exploration, and then you see it increase quite dramatically from the 17 to 1900s in the year 2000. And I asked students what led to this technological change, and I also walk them through if Caesar Augustus, the most powerful person in the world at the year zero, were to travel to George Washington's time in 1789. And we go through this entire thing. How would he get from Rome to the United States? It'd have to take a boat, it'd take months. When he got to the United States, then how would he get to the White House? Well, it wouldn't be the White House, it's the presidential manor in New York City. He'd have to ride a horse or he'd have to walk. And when he got to the White House, he'd see slaves, and then, or to the manor, he'd see slaves. And then if him and George Washington talked into the night, the house would be lit up by oil lamp or candle. Really, the world isn't much different to Caesar Augustus 1789 years after he exists. The world would be quite comfortable to him. He'd probably notice some fashion trends different. He'd be really interested in the habit of the gun, but for the most part, life hasn't changed much. Then let's say that he goes back to Rome and then he comes back in the year 2020. This world's going to look completely alien and foreign to him. He's going to go to, let's say he starts in Rome, he's going to be able to fly from Rome to the United States, in less than a day. Where sailing would have taken him a lot longer and been a lot more dangerous. Flying, he'd get here in less than a day. He'd take a car from the airport to the White House where he'd meet security. And then looking around, he'd see women in positions of power. He'd see different people of different ethnicities in positions of power. And you'd see the library that's available to people in their hands that has more knowledge than he could ever hope to attain at people's fingertips. So in the span of about 250 years, the world changes so drastically that it looks like an alien planet to them. And I ask students, why do you think that is? And a lot of times they'll say, well, technological advancements. And that's part of it, but what makes those technological advancements happen? It's not like people in the year zero were like, we don't know what this technology thing is or how to advance. And so we're just going to leave it. And then there's some kind of miracle that happens in, in the 1700s that like flips a light bulb on, metaphorically, because that doesn't happen until the, late 1900s, but or until, I'm sorry, the late 1800s. But you know, it's this idea of voluntary trade and the idea that people keep most of what they do when they work. So this was another poll I was going to ask: what causes GDP to increase, or that gross domestic product? And like I said, a lot of times students want to say technology. Time, as you saw in the last graph, doesn't change that, because we had 1789 years for GDP to increase and it didn't increase much. Government printing money is never a good way to get economic growth, but individuals trading is the way that economists see most economies growing. So what is this whole idea of voluntary trade creates wealth? We define what the word voluntary is for students. We define what trade is, this for that. We define what wealth is, because a lot of times I ask students, well, what's wealth? And they just say, well, just more money. And I said, well, if that's true, why doesn't the government print a whole bunch of money and just give it to us all? And they kind of realize quickly it's probably a bad idea. And I have one of my favorite props in my classroom, which is this $100 trillion note from the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. There was so much inflation, hyperinflation in Zimbabwe, that they used to not count these bills when you went to go buy things like milk and bread, but they'd actually weigh them to see if you actually had enough money to do that. So it's not just the accumulation of money, and so we get this idea that it's more than just stuff we can buy. It's more than just a standard of living. Really, it's this kind of general idea that if you can do with the things and the skills that you have what you want to do with them. If that means buying a big house or giving all your money away to charity, it's that idea that you're able to do that, and that wealth is kind of the general feeling and sense that one gets when you begin to trade for things. And again, we most certainly trade more for time than anything else. So trade is a win-win proposition. All right, so this brown bag activity shows this, and I'm going to walk through it, and you're going to get a hyperlink after the webinar so that you can actually take this PowerPoint if you wanted to and use bits and pieces that would work in a classroom. So students would get 4 pieces of paper, they divide it up like that. They will receive a brown bag with some little prize in it. If it's an elementary school teacher, I've seen teachers just have students bring something worth $1 or $2 from home that they don't mind parting with. And that's actually one of the best ways. You go to the dollar store and buy things. Having students bring things in is actually one of the better ways to get material for this, because you get some interesting stuff that kids really want. Again, they can look in it, but they can't show anybody else. And once they divide up these 4 pieces of paper and rip them into fourths, they'll write down a number from 1 to 5, showing how much they're actually satisfied with this. So they write that number down, we add it up. There's 5 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. I come around and collect them. I add up the numbers on the board, and what they end up doing is that number seems to be pretty low. They're able to then open their brown bags. They're able to look around. They're able to trade within their rows. I usually keep it to about 5 people, and I give them roughly 5 minutes. Usually, I get a little bit earlier done with that than that. And then after that 5 minutes, they're able to keep that little trinket. They're then able to write down on a scale of 1 to 5 how satisfied they are. Usually you see the number go up. Then I say, okay, we're going to do round 2 of this. And then I open the trade up to half the room. So 1/2 of the room can trade with 1/2, 1/2 of the room can trade with the other. And we go through the same thing, 5 minutes. Sometimes I throw a tariff into that. You'll see that in the expanded materials on the handout, that you can throw a tariff into it. That just makes it more difficult for them to trade with one another. And then after the 5 minutes, again, same deal on those little pieces of paper. They're right 1 through 5, and I add it up on the board and usually see the number go up. Then the last round, which again, if they have 4 pieces of paper, you've used 3. The original feeling, the first round, the second round where you split them in half, and then this last round where you can allow them to trade through the entire classroom. And again, I just let them trade with whoever they want. They can divvy the stuff up if they want to. I say it's theirs. Same deal, scale of 1 to 5, how happy they are. The number typically goes up then. And then we have a debrief on class of What do the happiness numbers look like? We call happiness utility in economics. A little SpongeBob there for you. And did people get to trade? Some people say yes, and some people get stuck with things that they never wanted and nobody else wanted, and their number usually goes down as the rounds progress. And we talk about that. Is that true in the actual economy? And students understand pretty quickly that, yeah, unfortunately, sometimes that happens. But there's some debrief questions here that you're welcome to use in your other class. There's additional resources. Again, you'll get the PowerPoint that they once the webinar concludes. There's another video about 200 countries in 200 years and what happens to their GDP. There's a video called iPencil from a very famous economist named Milton Friedman, where he says nobody knows how to make a pencil. And he walks through all the different parts of production of a simple pencil. It's pretty impressive to think about all that goes into a pencil and the fact that you can get them for 1 or 2 cents. And there's a toaster project, which is an art student that actually tries to make his own toaster instead of the other guy who made his own sandwich. It's really funny. The guy's super animated. He's British, so that usually keeps the students engaged there. There are podcasts that you can listen to or have your students listen to. And then there's the debate today about free trade versus tariffs on goods coming from places like China and such. So again, some ideas to maybe bring in some economics into your classroom. That's a big state standard that's being pushed out from elementary school all the way through high school. So this is maybe something to give teachers, especially or any teacher, because it seems like economics tends to be the redheaded stepchild of any school. But this is a way to maybe have teachers feel a little bit more comfortable teaching that material. So that's my webinar, and if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. All right, hi Shauna. All right, so.
I don't have any questions, Kurt. Thank you very much.
All right, wonderful, thank you.
They seem like excellent activities. I think that you're right that economics maybe seems to some students as a dry subject. So anything that helps them see the relevance and maybe have some fun while they're at it can really help them see how critical it is to have some understanding of these important concepts that have a big influence over our lives, especially as adults.
Absolutely. Well, like I said, I love the subject, and I could do 15 different activities that I do in the class, but this is one of my favorites, so I wanted to make sure I got a webinar done that included this one for sure.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing.
Absolutely, thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks.